Are you free to play or even a low spender that was very excited to get into the new Inferno difficulty, yet when you got there, you were really surprised to find that you seemed overwhelmed and that even though you met the combat rating requirement, you were having a lot of difficulty clearing the mobs and keeping the same kind of pace that you did previously? Well, let's take a look at one thing that was not mentioned in any of the patch notes. Now, there was definitely some information regarding that the Inferno difficulty would be a step up, but as most patch notes, it was pretty vague, and I don't think anybody was really expecting this kind of change. What we're going to look at first is my secondary stats, and this is going to affect players of all resonance. It doesn't matter if you're free to play, low spender, high spender, whatever the case may be. It's just far more dramatic for free to play more than anybody else. So what we're going to look at here is on this difficulty. I'm in the final hell difficulty. I have an armor pen that is 1,849, higher than expected for the mobs. Now I'm going to go ahead and change to the first Inferno difficulty, and what you're going to notice is that I am still ahead of the current difficulty with my individual stats. However, this is definitely not the case for everybody. In fact, look, now I'm just 1,091 ahead, and this is about a 760 point difference. That is a lot of armor pen that is required. In fact, the numbers for all the secondary stats seem to vary. I'm not going to go through and show all of them. You can do this on your own in the same way that I did. And I want to take this one step further. If we think about 760 points, well, that's a lot, right? Because when we go in and look at our Paragon Tree and what we get for some of these points, I have 10 points invested in resistance, giving me 40 points. So I'm getting 4 resistance per point. So if I want to overcome 760 points to get this new increase, I need just shy of 200 Paragon levels. And why does this matter? Well, because the new difficulties in Inferno have set a precedence of 100 levels per difficulty, right? We're going to unlock the next difficulty every 100 levels, and that's a big problem because I can only get halfway by spending my Paragon points, not to mention that giant jump that occurred just from going into the new difficulty. This is definitely a way to try to force players to spend, to try to get caught up, something to basically force the spending. This is no longer free to play, in my opinion. This is definitely pay to participate at this point. If you've made the jump and really been struggling, this is probably something to look at to see if that's what's going on with your character. Now, you can get secondary stats elsewhere. You can get that from your gear, your warband tableau, right? So you do have ways of increasing these and kind of offsetting some of these secondary stats. Is it enough? I don't know. I can tell you that a lot of players, free to play and low reso, are really struggling. They're noticing a lot of dramatic changes. The most pronounced thing that people are noticing has to do with armor. They're actually getting crit for very large amounts, and they almost can't survive in the new difficulty unless they're in a group, kind of have some other bodies to take hits or just ways to avoid damage one way or another. So let's go ahead and do one more jump up to Inferno 2. And just to remind everybody, I am currently at 1,091 armor pen higher. So let's go ahead and do another jump. And on the next difficulty, we're going to see that this is a lot less dramatic. However, there's something interesting here. It's now 880. It's 210 points. Okay, so that is still going to require 50 points to go in to get that 200, and you'll still be shy. Now, there's 4 stats here, meaning that you can only account for half of the gap if they're all roughly 200. And like I said, they do vary to some degree. Potency seems to be a little bit less severe, but in general, you cannot keep up with the number of Paragon points you're getting. You have to upgrade your regular gems. You have to get stats on your pieces, meaning you have to get upgrades for gear consistently. You have to get your warband tableau upgraded. It's just making everything incredibly difficult for free to play, and they certainly feel the effects much more than anybody else. Like I said, some players who have spent on the game have much higher secondary stats, so you can see that although the gap has changed, it doesn't affect these players as much because they're still going to be ahead or exceed these levels and have more duration as opposed to being reductions. And the reductions is what's making this so difficult for other players. So how do we feel about all this, and how does it affect PvP? Well, it does not affect PvP at all because these stats are compared to the target, meaning that if you have high armor pen, when it is compared to the target's armor, if you exceed their value, you will have an increase, and if you are below it, then you will have a reduction. So nothing has really changed in PvP in this regard. This is strictly in PvE, so I want to make sure that that is clear. I don't mind if anybody leaves comments about secondary stats or PvP in general. I just want to make sure that everybody is clear this is just a nerf to free-to-play and low spenders in PvE. And it is essentially a nerf to spenders of all levels, is just far less dramatic to players that have spent on the game. And again, I imagine that this is a way to try to kind of incite spending to get people to keep up. It's becoming more and more difficult for players to keep up, and time simply won't allow you to do that anymore. You have to almost spend in order to keep up something like these secondary stats. And what is the worst part of all this? In my opinion, this is going to make it even more difficult for new players entering the game. That jump from Hell difficulty to Inferno is enormous. 760 some points. Absolutely enormous. That is just one stat. Okay, if we go through and do all the stats, there's an enormous increase in the number of secondary stats you need to be just to meet the requirement. Now, it is okay to have a slight reduction. Nothing wrong with kind of having a challenge or a difficult mob to kill, especially if you're free to play. However, I think that some of these increases are a little dramatic, as I've said, and kind of makes it unfair and just so difficult to keep up. I would have liked something a little more in line of what we've seen from previous difficulties so that the free to play could continue to keep up, as opposed to kind of feeling like it's impossible at this point. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.